What if saving money stopped feeling like sacrifice and started behaving like a skill you can practice daily? This short audio summary turns saving money into a clear playbook. Simple rules to automate savings, small experiments that reveal where your cash quietly leaks, and decision filters that make better choices nearly automatic. Listen for 3 immediate moves you can apply today. A one-line budgeting rule, a 48-hour spending pause, and a tiny automated transfer that builds momentum, and test each for 7 days. The aim is measurable progress, not willpower. Stay with this audio until the end, and you'll finish with a practical routine you can use this week to grow your margin, reduce stress, and make saving an easy habit rather than an uphill chore. Chapter 1. Reframe saving as an active strategy, not a chore. What if saving money became a skill you practiced daily instead of a punishment you performed occasionally? The first practical step toward consistent saving is a cognitive shift. Stop thinking of saving as depriving yourself and start thinking of it as purchasing future freedom and options. To operationalize that shift, begin with a tiny, non-negotiable rule that anchors the rest of your financial behavior. Automate a fixed percentage of every incoming dollar the moment it arrives. Call this your savings first rule and make it irreversible by automating transfers on payday. The size of the percentage matters less than the habit. Start small, 2 to 5%. If higher feels impossible, and escalate by 1 percentage point every 3 months. What automation does is remove decision friction and remove the moral calculus that kills good intentions at the checkout line. The second move is to create a simple taxonomy of your spending categories, so saving decisions are contextual rather than abstract. Split expenses into essentials, investments in capability, education, tools, and discretionary identity spending. Essentials keep the lights on. Capability investments compound into higher earning potential. Identity spending signals who you want to be and should be deliberately tested. For 30 days, track each discretionary purchase and assign a one-line justification: emotional return, functional return, or social signaling. This experiment reveals where your money leaks under habit or peer pressure and gives you data to reallocate toward higher return choices. Third, convert vague goals into concrete, horizon-based targets. Instead of saying, "I want to save more," specify 3 buckets with time horizons and amounts. A margin bucket for next 6 to 12 months, a medium-term goal for 1 to 5 years, and a long-term growth bucket for retirement and optionality. Give each bucket a distinct account and label so transfers feel meaningful and easy to explain to yourself. Fourth, use commitment devices to protect savings from rationalized splurges. Examples include locking a portion of savings into slightly less accessible accounts that require extra steps to withdraw, using apps that require a cool-off period before transfers, or setting up matching with a partner where breaking a rule requires a small penalty. The psychology of small costs prevents big mistakes. Fifth, build momentum with visible progress rituals. Every payday, mark the transfer on a simple one-line tracker, and once a month, summarize the net change in your runway, measured in days you could survive without income. This concrete metric turns abstract savings into a daily feeling of increasing security. Finally, practice tactical frugality rather than constant austerity. Identify 3 high-return substitution strategies. Cook at home 3 nights per week, replacing takeout. Shift to a cheaper cell phone plan and bank the difference. Or renegotiate recurring subscriptions and treat them as experiments. Test each for 30 days and measure both financial and emotional results. If you feel no loss in happiness, the savings are real wins. If you do lose meaningful satisfaction, you've learned something valuable about where to preserve spending. Reframing saving into an active, experimental, and automated practice makes the habit sustainable and effective because it replaces willpower with structure, data, and small repeated wins that compound into real optionality over time. Chapter 2. Margin. First, build buffers before bigger dreams. The single most practical lesson for durable saving is to prioritize margin over glamorous goals. Margin means financial runway, enough liquid resources to cover essential expenses for several months without stress or catastrophic compromise, so you can say yes to opportunity and no to desperation. Set a concrete margin target aligned with your job volatility. 3 months of essentials if your income is steady, 6 to 9 months if freelancing or commission-driven. Create a dedicated margin account and automate a recurring transfer, sized to reach that target in a reasonable time frame. 9 to 12 months is sensible for most people, and protect it with rules. No lifestyle upgrades or large discretionary expenses until the margin goal is reached. Margin buys optionality. It allows you to pursue productization projects, take cheap career risks, or simply sleep through a market downturn. Next, design rules for how margin is used and replenished. Define a short menu of acceptable deployments, such as short sabbaticals, for validated career experiments covering emergency medical expenses or seizing time-limited asymmetric opportunities. When margin is used, replenish it first before reallocating savings to growth buckets. This discipline prevents one-off dips from cascading into long-term regression. Third, create a small emergency checklist that reduces the impulse to raid margin for non-emergencies. A list of 5 examples that qualify and 5 that don't, and require a 48-hour cooling off for any non-urgent drain. Fourth, learn to treat unexpected windfalls differently from base income. Use a fixed split rule for one-time money such as tax refunds or bonuses. Allocate a percentage to margin until it's topped up, another portion to long-term investments, and a modest share for a joyful expenditure that keeps morale high. This split reduces the urge to blow windfalls on status and increases the likelihood that lucky events improve your resilience. Fifth, visualize margin in time rather than in dollars. Translate buffer goals into runway days. How many days of essentials could you cover if income vanished? Runway is an intuitive metric that motivates behavior more effectively than a loosely defined savings figure. Finally, institutionalize margin maintenance as a non-negotiable habit, a quick monthly check and a quarterly review that asks whether your runway has grown or shrunk and what actions you need to preserve it. Prioritizing margin first changes your decision space. Once you operate from a position of runway, other saving and investing choices become calmer, clearer, and more powerful. Chapter 3. The 48-hour pause and the art of delayed gratification. Impulse purchases are the silent enemy of saving. A single impulse repeatedly repeated is the difference between financial slippage and meaningful accumulation. One simple, empirically effective tool is the 48-hour pause rule for any discretionary purchase above a modest threshold. When you feel the urge, enforce a 2-day delay, during which you record the desire. Imagine owning the item for a week and note any social or emotional triggers that prompted it. Very often the urgency dissipates. When it doesn't, you have clearer evidence that the purchase will deliver sustained value. Complement the pause with an alternative ritual. If the purchase is about emotional uplift, schedule a small, low-cost experience that tests the same need for a week: an affordable dinner, a local outing, or a brief class, and compare satisfaction. This substitution experiment creates data and reduces regret because you approach consumption as an experiment rather than a reflex. Next, pair the pause with a visibility metric. If you cross the threshold after 48 hours, require a one-line justification to be logged and re-evaluated after 7 days of ownership. The act of logging reduces cognitive dissonance and often leads to returns if the value is lower than expected. Third, design automatic friction for harmful categories. Remove saved card details from retail sites, set one-click purchase limits, and use apps that require multi-step confirmation for high-ticket items. Friction is not punishment. It's prudence engineered into your environment. Fourth, teach your future self with pre-commitment contracts. Promise a small friend or partner a modest penalty if you fail to respect the 48-hour rule, or set up a charity donation triggered by impulsive buys. Social cost and loss aversion heighten adherence. Finally, practice gratitude and review rituals that reward restraint. Compile a monthly list of purchases deferred and calculate the cumulative savings. Seeing saved totals builds positive reinforcement. The 48-hour pause moves saving from abstract to tactical and retrains your impulses so that over time the delay becomes automatic and your purchasing choices align more closely with long-term goals. Chapter 4. Smart Bucket. Allocate intentionally and automate everything. Savings succeed when they are intentional and automated. The bucket approach is a practical architecture. Divide your money into a small number of labeled accounts, each serving a clear purpose: margin, medium-term goals, long-term growth, and a joy fund for low-cost delights. Each bucket has a target amount, a cadence for contributions, and rules governing withdrawals. The simplicity of few buckets prevents micromanagement, while the specificity reduces temptation to raid long-term accounts for transient needs. Automate contributions so money flows immediately and fearlessly toward goals. Automation must be paired with periodic rebalancing. Every quarter check whether contribution rates align with changes in income or expenses and adjust by small scheduled increments rather than reactive swings. For medium-term goals like a car or a course, use time-bound accounts where the cadence matches the timeline. For long-term growth, favor low-friction, tax-advantaged vehicles and automate dollar-cost averaging to avoid timing temptations. The Joy Fund is critical psychologically. Without small budgeted pleasures, saving feels punitive and is harder to sustain. Keep the Joy Fund modest but predictable and spend it without guilt because it prevents larger impulsive drains. Another practical step is to apply roundup and windfall rules. Use apps that round purchases to the nearest dollar and channel change to savings, and dedicate a predetermined split of any windfalls to each bucket. Margin first, then growth, then joy. Visualize buckets with simple labels and balance bars so progress is visible. The human brain rewards completion and the visual cue increases persistence. Lastly, establish simple governance, a monthly 5-minute review to reconcile transactions and a quarterly 30-minute planning session that updates targets. The bucket system converts vague intentions into a living map of priorities and, when automated, makes saving as routine as paying rent. Chapter 5. Tiny Experiments, Big Habits, optimized by testing, not by guilt. The smartest savers treat their lives like laboratories. Instead of moralizing about lapses, they run tiny experiments that reveal where money is best spent and where habits can be shaved. Pick one spending category each month to test: coffee, subscriptions, dining out, and run a 3-week experiment where you reduce spend by a concrete % and measure happiness and time saved. Keep an analog one-line journal noting satisfaction levels. Data trumps anecdotes. Use matched substitution tests. If you usually spend $50 a week eating out, try cooking similar meals and invest the difference into your margin for 4 weeks. Compare culinary satisfaction, time costs, and savings. Rarely do big pleasures vanish. Often small ritual adjustments deliver similar satisfaction for a fraction of the price. Experiment with income boost pilots simultaneously. Spend a small, fixed number of hours weekly on a side project and measure net gain after 2 months. Some pilots will produce revenue, some will teach valuable skills, and both outcomes justify the time. Importantly, view experiments as reversible and bounded. Predefine the test period, metrics, and a kill rule. So curiosity does not become open-ended commitment. Celebrate wins publicly in a one-line note to friends or in your tracker, and treat failures as learning. Document what changed and the next hypothesis. Over time, the accumulation of small experiments rewires preferences, builds confidence in budgeting choices, and creates a portfolio of small habits that compound into large savings outcomes. Chapter 6. Smart Saving, Tools and Automation. That do the work for you. Saving consistently becomes trivial when the right tools and automation hide the work from your conscious will. The practical principle here is simple. Design systems that move money before temptation can find it, and then make those systems invisible and boring. Start by implementing 3 automated flows that execute the moment income arrives. First, an emergency margin transfer into a separate liquid account sized to your runway target. Second, a recurring investment transfer into low-cost diversified vehicles that compound long-term. Third, a joy fund transfer that preserves small, repeated pleasures so saving doesn't feel punitive. The exact percentages matter less than the habit. Begin with conservative allocations you can sustain and then ratchet them up by 1 or 2 percentage points every quarter. As your discipline strengthens, use your bank's scheduled transfers or a budgeting app with auto-save features. Prefer separate accounts with clear labels, so balances tell a story: margin, growth, joy, without you having to think. Next, automate windfalls and roundups. Instead of treating bonuses or tax refunds as permission to indulge, predefine a split rule such as 50% to margin, 30% to growth, and 20% to joy or an experiment fund. Small rounding apps that deposit spare change into savings silently accumulate seed capital over months. The third automation is liability management. Automate bill payments and minimums so you avoid late fees that slowly erode savings discipline. Then automate a small overpayment buffer where possible to reduce interest costs and mental load. Beyond transfers, use technology to create friction where it helps. Store fewer payment tokens on retail sites, disable one-click payments, and use apps that require a multi-step confirmation for purchases above a threshold. These digital frictions replace weak willpower with engineered resistance and buy you time to apply the 48-hour pause rule. Also, integrate notifications and visuals. Weekly summary alerts that show how your margin and growth accounts moved create a feedback loop that rewards the habit. Visual progress bars for goals on mobile make small wins tangible and keep motivation high. The fifth tool is automation for recurring optimization. Schedule quarterly subscription audits with a simple checklist, or use services that aggregate recurring charges and let you cancel with one click. Those audits eliminate stealth drains before they calcify into normal expenses. Use simple templates for negotiations, pre-script calls or emails to vendors to ask for better rates, and automate calendar triggers to renegotiate annual contracts. The small savings compound. Finally, adopt an automation maintenance ritual, a 5-minute monthly check to ensure transfers still run as intended, and a quarterly 30-minute planning session to adjust allocations when income shifts. When automation becomes the default, saving is no longer a test of daily resolve but an engineered property of your financial life, and the cumulative result of boring, invisible work is a comfortable runway and steady progress toward goals. Chapter 7. Growing your income. High leverage moves that fund faster saving. There are two ways to increase savings dramatically: spend less or earn more. Because time is limited, the higher leverage path is to design income growth around scalable moves rather than incremental over time. Begin with an inventory of current income channels and classify each by leverage potential. How much additional income can be earned per hour of new effort, whether the channel scales without a linear time increase, and how quickly it can be tested. Prioritize channels that pass a simple rule of thumb. They either scale through productization, licensing, or leverage other people's attention, or they materially increase your core skill set and thus future rates. Examples include turning consulting knowledge into a repeatable workshop, packaging a niche skill into a digital template sold on a marketplace, or negotiating a revenue-sharing arrangement where distribution platforms do the heavy lifting. Design short sprints to validate each income idea. A 2-week pilot should produce a minimum viable customer, a conversion test, and a simple break-even analysis. If signal is positive, escalate investment gradually rather than all at once. Use a fixed time budget, say 6 hours per week, dedicated to income experiments to protect your baseline productivity. The next set of high-leverage moves involves negotiating existing income. Many people accept suboptimal fees or job packages by default. Develop a negotiation playbook, research market rates, document one-line value statements of your impact, and practice a concise ask anchored in outcomes rather than skills. Small raises or better contract terms compound massively over decades. Another high-leverage tactic is to build distribution partners. You can sell the same product or service through other people's audiences by designing pilot partnerships with clear revenue share and performance metrics. That externalizes customer acquisition costs and increases the ROI of your productization efforts. Use time arbitrage to buy leverage. Spend a modest amount to automate a process that frees repeated hours, which you then redeploy into income experiments. For instance, paying for bookkeeping or a basic virtual assistant can free dozens of hours yearly. Time freed is often the best investment for future earning. Finally, protect any new income with automated saving rules. When additional earnings arrive, pre-commit a fixed percentage into margin and growth buckets before adjusting lifestyle. This creates a behavioral bridge between income growth and sustainable saving, so windfalls accelerate resilience rather than consumption. Execute income sprints, automate capture of gains, and iterate. Over months, the scaled moves change your savings curve far more than cosmetic cuts. Chapter 8. Cutting recurring costs. Without pain, negotiation, consolidation, and substitution. Recurring costs are stealth drains because they become invisible over time. The pragmatic path to trimming them is threefold: negotiate, consolidate, substitute. Start with a subscription audit. List all recurring charges, rank them by monthly cost and emotional return, and identify the bottom third that yields low return. For each low-return service, design a one-step action: cancel, downgrade, or substitute. Use cancellation scripts you write in advance, so the act is quick and non-emotional. Short sentences explaining you no longer need the service and asking for confirmation of cancellation. For negotiable items, insurance, telecom, utilities, prepare a one-page negotiation sheet with market-comparable rates, your current tenure, and two simple options you will accept: a lower rate or a feature upgrade at the same price. Call or chat with providers using this script and take notes. Many providers have retention teams that can offer immediate discounts when presented with a clear alternative. Consolidation is another powerful lever. If you have multiple overlapping streaming services, test rotating them quarterly rather than paying all simultaneously. Schedule shared viewing nights to preserve social rituals without simultaneous bills. For banking and credit card fees, consolidate accounts where possible and use fee-free options. The annual savings add up. Substitution means replacing recurring paid services with lower-cost alternatives that preserve similar value. Monthly gym membership replaced by a few focused classes plus home workouts. Expensive meal kits swapped for batch-cooked meals that keep time savings while cutting cost. Early experiments with substitution should be time-boxed and measured on satisfaction and effort to avoid rebound. Also apply simple rules for contract renewals. Set calendar reminders 30 days before automatic renewals to reassess value. Small language changes in your mindset. Treat recurring costs as active decisions rather than inertia. Flip the default to no unless a service is consciously reauthorized. Over time, these small, low-friction actions accumulate into meaningful extra savings without living austerely. Chapter 9. Social Pressure, Identity Spending and How to Resist It. A major barrier to saving is identity-driven consumption, the purchases that signal who you want to be rather than who you currently are. Resisting this requires both practical tactics and subtle psychology. Begin by mapping your identity categories: work, hobby, social circle, and list typical purchases associated with each. For each category, set a micro-budget and an experiment rule. When tempted by an identity purchase, perform a substitution experiment where you commit equivalent funds to a high emotional return anchor for 30 days and compare outcomes. Often the anchor, more time with friends, a class that builds skill, a modest upgrade to home environment, outperforms the status item. Create a public justification ritual for identity spending. Before buying something meant to signal status, write a one-line justification that you must read aloud to a friend or save in a private log. The social cost of that transparency usually reduces impulse buys. Use scarcity-resistant generosity as a counterintuitive tool. Small, regular charitable acts or thoughtful gifts to close friends can deliver similar social signaling benefits at a fraction of cost and with deeper emotional payoff. Additionally, cultivate peer groups aligned with long-term thinking. Spend time with people who value experiments, skills, and projects rather than consumption. If your immediate social circle pressures upgrades, schedule regular low-cost gatherings that reinforce non-material values, book clubs, cooking nights, or community projects. Finally, change your personal narrative around worth. Practice 3 short daily reminders of past experiments that paid off to strengthen an identity of a prudent, curious person rather than a constant upgrader. The habits are small but effective. Substitution experiments, public justification, generosity, and social alignment reduce identity-driven leakage and preserve capital for truly meaningful experiences. Chapter 10. Measuring progress, adjusting rules, and celebrating. Wins. Sustained saving requires feedback loops. Without measurement, people drift. Design a weekly and monthly ritual that makes progress visible and decisions data-driven. Each week, spend 5 minutes reviewing 3 key numbers: runway days, how many days of essentials your margin covers, net new savings this week, and 1 experiment metric: conversion, calories saved, hours freed, related to cost-cutting or income growth. Monthly, run a short 30-minute deep dive, reconcile bucket balances, evaluate experiments against hypotheses, and adjust automated flows by a single, controlled increment if needed. Use simple dashboards or a spreadsheet with color-coded progress bars. Visual cues motivate consistency. When experiments fail, document what you learned in a decision ledger, why the hypothesis failed, and the next test you will run, so failure becomes a source of refinement rather than shame. Crucially, schedule celebrations that reinforce the pathway. When you hit margin milestones, celebrate with a pre-planned, low-cost ritual from your Joy Fund. This reinforces alignment between saving and living well. Adjust rules annually based on life changes, income shifts, family additions, or new goals, so your saving architecture remains fit for purpose. Periodic recalibration prevents rigid dogma from blocking useful evolution. Finally, teach the system by sharing small artifacts with a partner or a friend. Your one-page rules, the decision ledger, and a recent experiment result. Teaching accelerates your own learning and creates social accountability. A consistent measurement practice paired with adjustments and small celebrations converts saving from an abstract virtue into a practiced competency that reliably grows your freedom. Conclusion: small systems, repeated execution, and the comfort of a growing runway. Saving is less about heroic sacrifice and more about designing tiny systems that protect margin, boost optionality, and let your life expand without urgency. This week, pick 2 actions: automate a new transfer to your margin account and run a 21-day substitution experiment on 1 discretionary category. Measure the outcomes, log the lessons, and adjust 1 automation by a small percentage. Repeat these small cycles, and over months you will have a runway that changes how you make choices. When saving feels easy and boring, it is working. The quiet accumulation of small wins buys a life with more freedom, less stress, and more meaningful possibilities.